Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more, right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, promo code STAPLE20.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Thank you so much for giving us the most precious thing you have, your time, so we continue to do what we always do. Turn down the noise of the news cycle, get to the information we need to better discern the times we live in. Let's talk a little education today. A lot going on with education, but one of the nodes at the center of all the different debates and all the different controversies and policy things and news and headlines and noise and debate and look, nothing riles people up more than their kids. So education is fraught because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a huge part of the government. There's a school choice debate with the growth of private schools and homeschooling and online schooling and various other things. All this stuff makes a big ball of mess. At one of the nodes in the middle of that mess, though, where all these streams cross, is standardized testing. Now, why is standardized testing so important? Well, for one thing is all the stuff I just mentioned, education, funding, that stuff all has to be quantified in order for the massive bureaucracy and the exploding supervisory and administrative level of education in America to handle and to try to do things like what's a good teacher, what's a bad teacher, what school gets funding, what school doesn't get funding, what school's performing, what school isn't performing, how is a student performing or not performing, how's a teacher performing or not performing. You have to quantify that so that you can put it on a spreadsheet so you can send it up to the bureaucrats to say we need more money. That's also how they tell if a teacher's good or not. How did your kids do on the test? And that's how increasingly we tell whether a student has been educated or not. How do they do on the test? Now, there's a whole nother debate about that because just being able to regurgitate information on a test is not education. And I'm halfway quoting my father there, who was a career educator. And my mother was a career educator. She was a special educator. So I grew up in a household with teachers in it. And I got to see that from that side of it. I have a lot of sympathy for the in-classroom teacher. And I think we need to change our terminology to differentiate between the in-classroom teachers and the students, and then the big administrative level above them that's kind of crushing everything right now. We're going to talk all of this through the means of standardized testing, though. Our buddy Garion Frankel joining us from Texas. He's working up a PhD in pre-K through 12 education down at Texas A&M. I know, insert your Aggie joke here, but Gary's a good guy. We've had him on many times. Loves to talk education. He's got a good handle on this. Has a teacher's heart, even though he can talk the heavy policy stuff. Texas decided they were going to change how they do standardized testing. They came up with a thing called a STAR system. And Garion wrote a column about it in the Houston Chronicle, a huge newspaper in one of America's biggest cities. We're going to talk about it with Gary and kind of dig into this, not just the standardized testing, but the ripples that go out from that, those in-classroom teachers, how the parent, teacher, child relationship, which should be the core of all of education, is irrevocably broken in America right now, and nobody seems to really want to fix that part of it. We're going to talk about how standardized testing drives the funding, how it's frustrating and driving away teachers because teachers spend all their time teaching for the test and they don't actually get to teach anything to the students outside of that, and that brings a lot of frustration. Plus, if your kids don't perform, you don't get your raises, you don't get your bonuses. It becomes a hot mess in a hurry. We talk about some of the bigger picture stuff going on in education, as well as how COVID changed just about everybody's perception of education, as it should have, but I'm afraid we didn't learn the lessons we should have from the COVID mess and what that did to education. And I think the kids learned lessons that the adults haven't quite caught up to, and that the education establishment definitely hasn't caught up to. I'm also going to talk a little bit about school choice, how I'm all for school choice, but you're still going to have the vast majority of kids in America going to public schools. We can't just abandon public schools either. How do we balance those things? Garion Frankel returns today to Heard Tell. We're thrilled to have him. It's a great piece. We are going to link to it in the show notes and on the Substack. Make sure you read the full piece for yourself. A great conversation, getting in depth, standardized testing, and wider issues in education today on Heard Tell. And we're going to do it right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, we haven't talked to him in a while, but we need to, because we need to discuss his higher ed stuff, and he's one of those higher ed people. He's getting one of them fancy degrees that gets letters after your name and before the name, but we're never going to call him doctor anything. We just call him Garion Frankel. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I love to see you again. He's down at Texas A&M doing all sorts of Texas A&M things. Insert your own Aggie joke here, folks. Buddy, let's talk a little higher ed here. There's two stories I want to get into with you. I want to start with the piece you wrote for the Houston Chronicle, a paper of some note, as I'm told, biggest paper in Texas. Good to get there, my friend. Let's start big picture before we get into specifically what Texas is doing, though, because there's been a lot of talk in the last year or two about entrance exams. I think there's two prongs to the entrance exam debate. One of them is educationally, who's getting into the school, but then the other one is numerically and demographically, who's getting into the school. Is that a fair way to lay it out, that those are the two prongs of the debate? Because really, this just gets down to gatekeeping, right?
Oh, yeah, I would say so. And it really isn't anything more complicated than gatekeeping, particularly at, the quote unquote elite universities, which see themselves as cultivating the next generation of society's leaders. And it's an air of self-importance to who they are and how they admit students. And it makes the process infinitely more complicated and infinitely more political than you would see at maybe your average public state university that has very straightforward metrics as for who gets in and who doesn't. So it's absolutely a fair way to characterize it.
I also think, and let's just be adults here, higher education is a multi-billion-dollar business. It's its own economic ecosystem, and that's not just the education part. That's the staff. That's the people on campus. These Texas A&M is it's a city unto itself with a economic ecosystem to go with it. Everything down to the food vendors and the janitors, all the way up to the professors and the administrators. That's a lot of people and a lot of jobs. We want everybody to have jobs. Part of the problem with this entrance exam stuff is, though, these universities and colleges have figured out, though, if the money's going to keep flowing, you got to keep people coming in through the door. And the entrance exam is just one piece of that puzzle. That's also a fair way to talk about this, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's good that you point that out, because that's starting to become a real problem in Canada, which is a very similar higher ed infrastructure to the United States. And you're starting to see some of these Canadian effects at small universities in the United States as well. Because what happens is you have a whole lot of universities that nobody has heard of, that may or may not even be offering classes, start to pop up. they charge exorbitant fees, and then they advertise their very prestigious new university to places like India and China. And then they have a whole bunch of international students coming in, paying the full ticket price to get a university degree, and then not getting the full experience. And it's just taking advantage of them. And so the business side of higher education can be a really ugly place at times. And while I think, again, some of the public universities, just because of some of the intricacies of state funding, are a little bit insulated from this, it can still get pretty gnarly and not really what we have in mind as being socially beneficial.
It's funny you bring up Canada. Garion Frankel joining us. My suite mate, my freshman year at a very small college that doesn't exist anymore. Now it's WVU Tech's the campus, but it closed down after that. But College West Virginia, Beckley, West Virginia. My suite mate was from Hamilton, Ontario. How you doing, Anders? Hope you're well out there, wherever you are after 25 years. And this is 1998. And I was like, no offense, dude, but why are you at this no-name college when you grew up? You know, Hamilton's a big outside area outside of Toronto. I was like, what are you doing here? And he's like, it's cheaper. He's like, this is a third of what it would cost me to go to school in Canada. And that was in 1998. And he wanted to get the American experience and that sort of thing and that sort of stuff. This is not a new problem. This is an exasperating problem that's gone on for many, many years. People are just catching up to it. Give us a little bit of the backstory of the last 20 to 15 to 10 year periods of time, because this has really started to, I don't know what term you want to use, but it's almost like compounding interest. You know, all of a sudden, this is getting worse and worse and worse almost by the year now. These entrance things, the entrance exam problems. Why is this getting compressed? Give us a little bit of the history of why it's come to a head now.
Well, there's two major reasons why I think this is starting to come to a head now. And the first is really an older problem. And this is going back 40 or 50 years, where the federal government, and with the intention of trying to increase access to higher education for people for whom, for whatever reason, may not have had access to it previously, they introduced a student loan program. And student loans were meant to be a low interest loan that facilitated people from underrepresented communities to go to college. On paper, it's a great idea. But what the universities did is that they interpreted all of this as a free meal ticket. And as long as the government would be willing to dish out larger and larger loans to desperate prospective college students, then the universities could just keep increasing and increasing their prices. And with these increasing prices, there became more and more of an incentive to operate like a business. And so the gatekeeping started to play a much larger role, because how are you going to possibly filter through all these people? The other problem is I think the K-12 system in this country has adjusted itself to being for the purpose of sending people to college. Some of the civic reasons why we established public schools in this country, some of the general social or trade reasons that we established public schools in this country are starting to go by the wayside a little bit. They're not gone, but they're definitely taking a backseat to what proportion of this population of high schoolers can we put in some university somewhere in the country. So now you've created additional industries that feed the higher education monster of, okay, I'm going to start a business by getting these SAT scores for these kids as high as possible, so they have the best position of getting into these very expensive universities, and they're going to pay me a whole lot of money for the privilege. So it's a whole bunch of very negative industries feeding off each other over time, reacting to changes in government policy.
Now, this is a lot of background, but it's important before we get into the testing, because this is the environment we're dealing with. And this goes directly to what we're talking about with these entrance exams, because you just said it. We've had you on before. We've talked about this. We've talked about this with other friends of ours. The secondary education system has become a pipeline to the colleges, because now the secondary education, a lot of their funding is based on test scores. And now we're dealing with, well, you got to have these test scores for the funding in the secondary. Now we're dealing with what kind of test scores we're going to have to get into college, and then it's what kind of test scores are the college going to base on. It really becomes this self-feeding thing, hasn't it? And now that sets up a discussion about things like what's going on with Texas with This is why it's so important about these test scores, is because we can debate about it. Is the kids in the system, they've got to deal with it as it's evolving on the ground. And it really does greatly affect their lives and where they go to school and how they are graded and ranked and stacked and all that sort of stuff, trying to go to these schools because the system's made them do it that way.
Absolutely. And it affects the schools too, because in many states, Texas included, their accountability system is tied to how their kids do on these standardized tests. And under Texas law, if a single school in a district receives a failing accountability grade for 5 consecutive years, then the state gets to take over the district if they so choose. And so now you have sort of a federalism power play put into this, where theoretically the state and the state education agency can use these tests and how they're graded in order to assert their own authority over the individual school districts. And while this may seem sort of conspiratorial, I mean, just the way the politics of education are, who has authority and where, and how can I leverage my authority to get what I want, are ubiquitous, everlasting motives behind political decision making. And that includes the school system, and it includes how it feeds into higher ed.
Yeah, Garion Frankel joining us. Okay, so let's talk about this new Texas system. People are familiar with the ACT and the SAT. Those are the two big ones. There's a national debate where some schools dropped one or the other, and now they've started to bring them back. We'll talk about that at some other point. I was an ACT guy. I'm not great at math, so I just skipped that whole SAT thing. I did great on the ASVAB. But yeah, we weren't really worried about the SAT and the ACT because I was playing sports and having fun with my friends and didn't really pay attention in class. Let's just be honest about it. I did the ACT. One of my kids did really, really well on the SAT, very math minded. I have other children who've done other things. Compare this STAR system just so people can get their mind around it compared to what they're familiar with things like academic testing, ACT, SAT, college prep, this sort of thing. What is it similar and what's different?
So the STAR tests are just for the state of Texas. So they're like almost every state has some sort of standardized testing system. They were required to by No Child Left Behind, and then later on through ESSA. And this is Texas's version. And everybody in the state almost universally hates it, but nobody has any better ideas. So we're stuck with it for the time being.
We should put that on the scale of the Department of Education for the country, because that statement right there is exactly what's wrong with a lot of education. Everybody hates it, but nobody's come up with a better system, so we're going to keep doing it. Is that not just the perfect logo?
That's like 80% of education right there. So in Texas, the STAR tests run from 3rd through 12th grade. Throughout elementary and middle school, it's mainly just reading and math. But in high school, they also add biology, and in 11th grade, they add U.S. history. So there's a whole lot of STAR tests. And if you want to graduate from high school, you have to pass them all, and you only get one freebie. And the school's accountability metrics are based on how well their kids do on the STAR test. And like I said before, if you have a school that fails, that gets a failing grade for 5 consecutive years, then there's one of two options for the state. They can either force the school to close, or they can take over the entire district. And so far, Texas has shown a propensity for option 2, taking over the entire district, because that gives them more direct authority over what happens in the school. So this is a very high stakes test. It's stressful for students because it can determine whether or not they graduate. It's stressful for teachers because they have admin on their backs. And it's stressful for administrators because this could mean their jobs, their districts, and in some cases, the entire community. So when we talk about high stakes testing in education, it's stuff like this that we mean.
Yeah, Garion Frankel joining us. So as the outside observer, I immediately hear my dad, career educator, in my head, Mr. Donaldson, going, well, yeah, but now all they're going to do is teach to the test, and that's all the education you're going to be doing. How much of that is going on? Because the bad incentive to all this is once you start teaching to the test, you're not doing education anymore, you're doing regurgitation. That's another one of the lines I'm stealing from my dad. But look, he had degrees in curriculum and other stuff. He redlined textbooks in the summer for fun. That's just who that guy is. He was all about the system of education. That's what he would say to this. I think I agree with him. How much of that is occurring? Because if we're going to lose the whole district, which, Texas is a big place. You could be talking about tens of thousands of students in some of these districts, right? You guys got 4,000 or 5,000 kids in individual high schools down there in some places. This is a lot of people affected. This is a lot of money. This is a lot of power. And it's all being taught to the test to try to affect who has that power. That seems like a really perverse incentive to me.
Absolutely. And just last year, the state took over Houston ISD, which is one of the largest school districts in the country, much less the state, over a dispute that had been haggled out in court since before the COVID days. So this is something that, based on power, that the state is really wanting to do. And educational standards in Texas are tied to what are called TEKS. And the TEKS are often rather specific. And for every single subject, they isolate exactly what the state expects kids to know. And naturally, the TEKS heavily motivated what ends up on every individual STAR test. So like you pointed out, teachers have every incentive to just go by the book and teach to exactly what the TEKS say. And more so than the teachers, their administrators and their districts have every incentive to bully teachers into compliance, which is essentially what's happening. Because nowadays in the classroom, your average classroom teacher has very, very little individual autonomy in terms of how they do things, because they're being evaluated based on how they comply with these TEKS. They're being evaluated based on how their kids are doing on standardized testing. So they have every incentive in the world to not allow for exploration or creativity or any sort of deviation. It's all just teaching to the test. And you'd think that if everybody's teaching to the test, that the way is the test is being graded would be pretty straightforward, but it's not. And that's the problem Texas is starting to run into.
Yeah, Garion Frankel joining us. What really got people in a twist over this lately, though, and you bring it up in your piece, we're going to link to it, Houston Chronicle. They're not really going to use AI to test this stuff, right? Because you're talking about the autonomy of the teacher. You're talking about, let's not even talk about parental involvement in some of this, because here's the ratio for this. Let's just get real about this for a second. The less in classroom teacher involvement is, the less parent involvement, because that's the three legs of the stool, right? Student, teacher, parent. And that's what's getting damaged here. You start talking about all this state and federal funding. You start talking about AI grading of this stuff. The in-classroom teachers are getting taken out of the mix. The parents are getting taken out of the mix, and the students are just becoming a cog on it. You start talking about AI grading, and now people are really getting in a twist over this. And that's what's really lit a lot of this, is like, that's almost like the final straw. People are like, okay, so now no human being at all is going to get any say at all. This doesn't feel right to folks.
Absolutely. And the state of Texas is very insistent that I should make the notation that it is not AI grading. It's AI influenced grading. And these are not the same thing, of course. So no. The tests are not being graded based on AI. But it is objectively true that about a quarter of all free response questions on the STAR tests are going to be graded in an automated fashion. It's not humans anymore. And the state says, great, we don't have to hire as many people. We're going to save $20 million. And meanwhile, the automated grader is 4 times more likely to give a student no points for a particular question than a human grader, because, so it seems, the automated grader is incapable of processing misspellings or wisecracks or anything that makes these sorts of responses on the exam human. So now there's not just the objection of, well, I don't like the idea spiritually of a computer grading my kid's test. It has some very real implications that could be really problematic for teachers, students, and districts alike.
Gary and Frankel joining us. That was a very Clintonian answer you gave there. It's not, AI grading, it's AI influence grading. He didn't inhale. He was just, adjacently of whatever. Look, they're going to use technology for some of this. I understand they want to cut down on the workforce. I get all that arguments. But let's go back to where we started with this conversation. If you're going to hinge the entire education system on a testing system, which is what they're saying, like funding, graduate, whether you graduate or not, whether the teacher gets promoted or not, whether the teacher gets a raise or not, whether the district gets took over or not. If everybody's, lives, fortunes, and sacred honor are tied to these tests, why in the world wouldn't you want some oversight and human? They want to take less human out of it. I think you want to put more human insight over it.
You would absolutely want to put more human insight over it because, like you said, if you're going to design the entire education system around state testing, you better make darn well sure that the testing system is being graded honestly and appropriately. And that means there's going to be some nuance. And with current technology, based on everything we're seeing so far in Texas, the computer is not capable of that kind of nuance yet. So if anything, they should be hiring more human graders. But that's expensive, so the state doesn't want to do that. And instead, what we get is the ineffective computer system that they barely tested, announced 3 months before they actually implemented it, and nobody likes.
Yeah, and this goes directly to something that I think is the real problem in education. You've talked about this before as well. The more and more you do this stuff, you're going to need more administrative people. You're going to need more supervisors. You're going to need we have this exploding bureaucratic level of quote unquote educators who have educator credentials, but never go in a classroom and never actually teach a child anything. Meanwhile, the in-classroom teachers are really getting screwed on both ends because the people above them blame them for everything. The parents are blaming them for everything. They're just caught in the middle. These resources need to be going to the in-classroom teachers that do the in-classroom work with the in-classroom children. And the more and more you do this stuff, the more and more the system is going to be allocating resources away from the in-classroom teachers. I don't see any way that is not how this always winds up, because this is how it always winds up.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of really good research about this. I think one was from the Commonwealth Foundation in Pennsylvania, where they give a whole bunch of teacher surveys and they ask them to estimate how much the district spends per child on education. And almost every time the teacher dramatically underestimates how much the district spends. And you might have some people say, ha, 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 teachers are stupid, but that's not really what's going on here. What's going on here is that teachers are not seeing any of the money that is ostensibly supposed to go towards educating children, because so much of it gets swallowed up into the ever-expanding bureaucracy. And of course, all of these highly credentialed people are going to command six-figure plus salaries that add up. They're very expensive. They get lots of benefits too. And so when teachers have questions like, why can't the school buy basic supplies and materials for my classroom? Or why haven't I gotten a raise in 5, 6, 7 years? Or, well, why does the district next door with much higher property taxes get more amenities than my district that gets the same amount because of state and federal funding? It's because of this. It's because of the regulatory system. It's because of the way school finance is managed. And it's just an ever increasing bloat. And you'd love to think that it's eventually going to pop, but I think this balloon can hold a whole lot more helium.
Yeah, and it really hits parents. I've been that parent. You show up to school that first day or the day before school starts, or, open house night, whatever they call it, and you get handed this list for a couple $100 of classroom supplies you get hit up for. And you're looking around at this school building and all the money involved in it, and you're like, well, wait a minute. That ain't, that creates, that goes back to what I was saying. The parent teacher student relationship in America is broken, and it's things like that are breaking it down, because the administrator isn't standing there, the district superintendent isn't standing there, the bean counter that came up with that plan isn't standing there, the person from the state that told them to do it isn't standing there, the classroom teacher standing there. So they get the brunt of that, and it's not even their fault, because they just need Kleenexes in their classroom. These are the things, they're policy things that people talk about, but we miss out on the human element of these kids have to physically go in this classroom with this physical person's got to sit there and supervise them and educate them and try to take care of them for 9 to 10 months at a time. And the parents have to have a relationship with all of that to make that all work. And that's the stuff that breaks it down at a fundamental level. And then we wonder why test scores are weird. That seems like a kind of a core thing to start that process, and it just doesn't show up until you start getting to why are the test scores all screwed up.
Absolutely. For better or for worse, teachers are the faces of education. And in some states, this is why teachers' unions have become so powerful. And on the flip side, it's why teachers get blamed for everything. But in the end, most of the problems with the education system in this country result from bureaucratic decisions, or wanting the school or the state wanting the school to manage and run absolutely everything. And they set all these standards and expectations, but provide absolutely no guidance for how to meet them. It's an absolute mess. It's a quagmire. And when people talk about education reform, like with the Education Reform Coalition of the 90s and the early 2000s, and well, maybe we just need to streamline things now, or maybe you have some of the more cultural regulations that you're concerned about, all it does is make things infinitely more complicated for the day-to-day operations. And all it serves to do is to give the uglier bureaucrats who sit in an office and make $275,000 and they've never seen a kid in their life more powerful, whereas the earnest classroom teacher that genuinely wants to be there and genuinely just wants to teach kids, they are less powerful. So it's creating a system with all the wrong incentives, with a million problems, and dealing with them is like trying to untie the Gordian knot, and we don't have an Alexander the Great who can just slice the whole thing open.
Why do people think that the same people that run the DMV and run the education system, but the education system is going to run better just because we call it education?
That's a really good point. I think it's just that schools are community institutions because of Friday Night Lights and the band and the art club and all that. They're community institutions in a way that the DMV is not. So people would understandably have reason to believe that the community would have a bit more of a role to play on how those institutions are run, but they're really not. Even your local school board can only do so much because so much of these directives come from the state. And it's really those directives that have created this tangled bureaucratic mess.
Have we really, Gary and Frankel joining us, have we really fully understood what COVID did to education? Because I've been pounding the table on this. I had a kid that lost her senior year of college and her graduation. They finally, I think on paper, graduated her like in September because they had to jury rig something. Had one kid that was senior in college, had two kids that were in middle school and high school respectively. So we got the full COVID experience and watching and what was going on. We told a whole generation of kids exactly what we thought education was to them. But parent-wise, have we really grappled with how that changed? Because you just talked about people saw schools as a community thing for a lot of ways, especially high schools, because, you go to football games, you go to baseball games, you go to the theater, you go to the music performances. I get all that. COVID took the community part away, and people, I think for the first time, a lot of them was like, oh my God, this is a massive jobs program. This is the largest daycare system in America. they saw the school system differently because it affected their lives differently because something that was always there had been taken away. I know our local schools here, they were closed for 13 months straight. There wasn't any of the opening close. They just shut them down. 13 months in those schools. I don't know that we fully reckoned with how that's going to play out over time. Not just the students that went through it. I think parents for the first time kind of saw schools differently. They saw the business end of it. They saw the politics. They saw the money. They saw that, oh, well, I care about this way more than the state and local government cares about this. You know, I had my own youngest child just look at me and like, what do I care? It's on the news. They're not allowed to fail us. Why should I work hard? You know, that's an ethical question, but they said it and they weren't wrong because it was on the news. Hey, you're not allowed to give any kid anything under a 50. That came out on the news. It got out. Have we really reckoned with how that's going to change people? Because I know we're talking test scores and things like that, but I think 5-10 years from now, when those kids and those parents are a little bit more down the road and a little more influential, I think we're going to see some real changes in how people view all this. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think it's absolutely a fair way to say, and you're already starting to see some of the signs of it because the parent power movement that emerged as a result of COVID and really hung around in force for 2 years before they started going out towards left field on some of the cultural stuff. But that movement is still there. It's still powerful. They're still winning elections in some places. And at the legislative level, at the state level, they're getting a lot done because every year there's more and more expansions of educational choice programs, which are marketed and may very well be an opportunity for people to escape these systems and say, well, this thing we can't reform this anymore. Here's your ticket out if you so choose. But as some of the kids who lost critical years for socialization and academic development during the pandemic, those are going to be a lot of troubled teenagers and young adults about 10, 15 years from now. So you're right. I don't think we've really grappled with what COVID did to the education system, and more importantly, to the students, teachers, and parents within that education system. And I'm honestly pessimistic that people will come around to it, but they're only going to come around to it when it's too late and the problems have already started to emerge past the point of no return.
Yeah, Garion Frankel joining us. One more thing on this, and then I'll get off it. But it's the thing with the COVID stuff. You just said it. I think that's where it really became us versus them, which is unhealthy in an education system. But that's how people felt. I know my community, the elementary school and the high school is right across the street from the shopping center with the McDonald's and the big grocery store and whatever. And like everybody, it was just the perfect dichotomy because it was like, oh, if you go over here, you die, but all the same people are just standing over here every day talking to each other. And people just could not process it. What do you think is going to be the result? I know you said it just a little bit, but is it going to be a policy thing? Because I think people have started to realize that just pumping money into this thing is going to do it. I'm all for school choice, but you're still going to have 90+% of the kids in public school, no matter what you do, even no matter how you do that. So that's going to be limited to a certain, and frankly, a certain demographic and a certain economic group is going to be able to really make that work. What is it that's going to change? Is it going to be the money part? Is it going to be the political part? Is it going to be the cultural, the community part that we've talked about? Like, hey, we've lost the community of our schools. Let's get our schools back in our community. Which part of that is going to be a positive part to try to get back into it? Because a lot of those, you can try to crusade for good stuff and make things a whole lot worse. And I've already seen some stuff. You just mentioned it, some of the parents' choice stuff. No offense to those folks, you have a right to do that, but some really lunatic people get involved in that sort of stuff, and it gets into some crazy town really, really fast. We've seen the videos. So that got into a bad place in a hurry. which one of those is going to be a positive avenue that maybe has less likely to get off rail and get into people's bad tendencies? Because people get over emotional when you mess with their kids. They just do.
Yeah.
So how do we go in a positive direction here?
I think that the best avenue, at least out of all the ones you mentioned, best in turn, and when I say best, I mean most realistic, is probably the policy route. You would hope that state legislatures, especially since there are two of them, would take the time to reason these sorts of things out. Obviously, they have clear political and economic incentives, and that they're going to obviously respond to what their voters want. But there is that, I hope, underlying sense of civic duty among some of them. I mean, heck, John Adams wrote a whole treatise about it in 1776. You would hope some of that's still lingering around. So I would think that if you can get at least a short-term coalition, I don't think you're going to get any long-term coalitions in education, but if you can get a short-term coalition together with some very specific policy outcomes, and then give schools and districts the leeway to achieve those outcomes as they see fit, you might start to see some of those improvements. I think another thing that often gets undersold, and this would be a pretty straightforward policy change, is more civil liability protections for teachers. Because one of the big reasons why administrators and districts are so unwilling to support teachers in maintaining control of their classrooms is that they're terrified that somebody will touch a student, that there's going to be this $1 million lawsuit, and that the district will be right through the coals. If you give teachers some protection in order to just manage the pandemonium that affects their classrooms every single day, you're going to have more time for learning. You're going to have a calmer environment. And then maybe at that point, you can get around to some of the other loosey-goosey initiatives, like everybody gets a 50, even if you turn nothing in. But to a certain extent, none of that's going to start until you have a particular end goal for what you want to achieve in education, as well as the classroom management to even implement anything to begin with.
Yeah, and I'm going to harp on this again because I think it's probably the most important piece of all of this. How do we re-empower the in-classroom teacher to actually teach? Not just get a test score, not just manage children for a couple hours a day, not be a daycare provider, but how do we empower teachers to actually teach in the classroom? Because, and you said it earlier, we have piled so much stuff on these in-classroom teachers. I don't care if it's a third grader or a 12th grader or what. They don't have time to teach, and they don't have an environment in which they can teach and actually educate 20, 30 kids, especially having to individually figure out how each kid learns and that stuff. How do we empower these teachers to actually teach again? Because I think unless we do that, the rest of this is just kind of window dressing and we're not really accomplishing anything anyway.
I completely agree. And in order to empower teachers, in order to give them more autonomy in their own classroom, you have to protect them. And I said it a little before, but part of the problem is that teachers are, for better or for worse, the faces of education. They oftentimes deservedly get the credit for everything good that happens, but unfortunately, and much more commonly, they get the blame for everything bad that happens, even if they had absolutely no control over it whatsoever. So I think that in order to facilitate some of this autonomy and some of this freedom to just teach kids, which is what the vast majority of them signed up to do in the first place, they just want to teach, is you have to protect them as a district, as an administrator. You have to protect them. As a lawmaker even, you have to protect them from some of these outside forces that intend to pin everything bad that happens in the education system on your average, everyday, 7th grade math teacher. And that's not to say that teachers shouldn't have any accountability whatsoever, that there aren't bad teachers or that bad teachers shouldn't be fired. But I think we need to do more to protect the good teachers that are doing their best, that just want to teach kids and just want to be able to work within their classroom on a day-to-day basis without having to prevent a brawl or multiple students from killing each other, which is unfortunately the reality that a lot of the teachers around the country have to face right now.
Yeah, and there's no pay raise, there's no benefit program that's going to incentivize teachers to teach in the classroom or to pursue a career in education unless they feel empowered to actually be able to teach. Because people that want to teach, it's a passion and a calling, the ones that really care and the ones that are really good at it. Look, both my parents are educators. I've got one child that's got a degree in education that's not teaching. I got another child that's getting ready to graduate with a degree in education who has no plans to teach because of what she learned getting the degree in education. Like, unless you get those kind of people who want to teach and give them a system where they feel like they can do it, there's no pay raise in the world that's going to incentivize people to come in to do it, which means you're going to incentivize people that shouldn't be teaching to teach because that's who you're going to get. I think that's really going to be the key to any meaningful education reform is if we don't have good teachers, none of it's going to matter anyway. That's just my soapbox.
No, you're absolutely right. And a big part of the discussion about teacher salaries that doesn't get reported on in mainstream journalistic outlets because it's a much more difficult narrative to counter. It's not just teachers saying, I'm paid too little. There's a second part to that sentence. It's, I'm paid too little for all the nonsense I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And
there
those
you go. That's correct.
are not the same thing.
No, they're not. I remember I was at a gas station a couple of years ago. It was funny, and the lady was being really ugly to the poor guy behind the counter because it's in North Carolina. So it's the North Carolina Educational Lottery. And the poor woman is just berating the poor guy at the counter, and it's not his fault or whatever. And she's finally like, I'm a teacher. Why can't I ever get any of the money from this education lottery? And the poor kid, sometimes you get wisdom from odd places. The poor kid behind the counter that's been yelled at as a cash register guy at the gas station at 11 o'clock. And I was like, lady, you get weekends, holidays, and the summer off. And just every now and then you get a little nugget from somebody you don't expect. But we love teachers. I want education to succeed, but when we're doing all this test stuff, I think we just lose the in-classroom stuff. Tell me, as a way to kind of round this off and go back to where we start, where do you see this going? Because the ACT, SAT stuff's kind of gone back and forth. We were going to talk about FAFSA, we didn't even get to it. We ran off the head of the FAFSA and the student debt he's resigned now because it's such a mess.
It is.
What do you think the big thing in the next couple of years is this, this COVID generation really gets into going to college, especially the kids that are in like middle school are going to start rising up through formative experience for them. What do you think we should be watching? Is it the test score debate? Is it the gatekeeping? Is it we're starting to see a real plateau of colleges as far as admissions? What is it we're going to have to really watch for? Is it the explosion? I think we're going to see an explosion of online degrees because we had a whole bunch of kids go, oh, I like this online thing. Why should I go pay, $13,000 for room and board for no good reason? What is the few things you think we should be really watching in this higher education debate over the next couple of years?
Yeah, as far as higher education goes, I think one thing to keep an eye on for is just the types of behavior going on campus. And I'm not just talking about culture war, protesty stuff. That's always happened on colleges. But what I mean is that you have an entire generation of kids, essentially, that, like I said before, lost critical years for social and educational development. And when you suddenly ask this group of kids to be adults, there's a real question of, are they going to be able to handle it? I don't know the answer. Colleges don't know the answer. I don't think parents or schools know the answer. And it's just something that we're going to have to watch out for. I think another thing to keep an eye on is that I think admissions in general, I think that plateau is eventually going to be a decline. Depending on what states implement policies and where, I can see a return to the trades in some extent, particularly for men. But there's also the very real possibility that there's just going to be a whole lot more idle young adults. You're already seeing a trend line of the number of 18 to 24-year-olds who report not having a job, not being in school, and living at home. That proportion is going up, and it's entirely possible that it may continue to go up. And third, I think you're going to see more and more schools reinstitute testing requirements. You're already starting to see this. I think it's only going to continue. I don't think that'll be true for postgraduate education quite as much because the data there is a little different. But it sounds terrible, but this is the way that a lot of universities really think. I think a lot of universities, particularly the elite ones, are unsatisfied at the quality of students that they're getting in these past couple classes. So I anticipate the gatekeeping to skyrocket.
Yeah, and you mentioned the trade stuff. The loss of vocational programs in high school has been just so detrimental, and other things. The loss of a lot of music programs, the loss of a lot of art programs, where you get a more well-rounded student. That all had to go away so we could teach to the test more. Let's just all be adults here. My youngest she's taking college track engineering level math and science classes now. We'll have several credit hours at the community college before she graduates high school taking those classes. There's no reason juniors and seniors shouldn't be taking vocational classes like that as well. Not just college track, but they could learn a trade. They can learn HVAC, construction, jobs that pay really. I had a plumber out of my house because I had a little leak in a line a while back, and he was telling me, he's like, I'm 24 and just bought my second house. He's like, we're starting guys off $70,000 a year. Can't get anybody to work. Just people that would work as a plumber, because they just don't have the trades giving people. You don't have to make a career out of it. Maybe you do it 5 or 10 years, save up a nest egg and go do something else. I've told my children, your first job's going to suck. It just is. Just learn to work, get a good work record, and then you build up to whatever job you want to do. But just do something for 6 months to a year. Get a work record. There's no reason, if we're doing these college level courses and these juniors and seniors in high school, we can't do vocational and practical stuff. Why not let them leave school at 1:00 and go work for a couple hours if they want to do that? Just some kind of something to incentivize education, to work, to career, to life skill building, to cut into that idleness you're talking about that's really starting to pile up. Because to be fair to some of them, and I'm not going to excuse all of it, if you're taught that you have to go to college or bust and you're just not made out for college, I wasn't made out for college. I was a disaster at college, and thank God I got in the military. I would have really been a mess. But I was 20 years old when I went in the military because I was listless. I was working at Walmart because I flunked out of college because I was a knuckleheaded moron, right? It was my own fault. But if we incentivize some of this stuff, maybe we can cut into that in a meaningful way. Because if you just tell every kid they got to go to college, and statistically we know only 40% of kids are going to go to college and succeed, and only about 25 of them are going to graduate, we're setting them up to go into that listless space that you're talking about as a young adult, aren't we?
We absolutely are. And to their credit, some states are making an active effort to reintegrate career and technical education into the public school system. Texas is starting, though there's still not enough of it. Georgia has a pretty good system. Florida is starting to put something together. But the problem is that just the way the incentive structure within public education is constructed right now, the state legislature essentially has to force career and technical education, force the arts and humanities, force civics education back into the curriculum. And while some states have been able to do that and have been very successful doing so, I'm a big fan of the arts and humanities stuff myself. Just the way that the political and economic incentives are structured for state legislatures and some other places, those types of programs just aren't politically feasible right now because all the political capital is being spent elsewhere. So it's unfortunate that these very real and very necessary types of programs and innovations within education are sometimes reliant on how a certain few key actors in a few key places spend their political capital, but that's just the way the system is designed, and that's just something people are going to have to overcome.
I was blown away when my daughter was signing up for those classes and we were up at the community college. You know what the most popular summer program for middle school and high school kids to take, they do the summer programs at the colleges. You know what the most popular one by far is? Computer coding with Roblox. Sell it out. They can't have enough of them. Kids just drive right in. There's no excuse for secondary schools to not be doing coding classes like that. And, I had to sit through web design, which remember when everybody's going to have designing web pages was going to be a big career. You're teaching at early days of the internet, right? But there's no reason that secondary schools shouldn't be teaching coding and stuff like that, that if a kid's interested in it, that they could, why not teach them how? I know people make fun of content creators, but hey, the kids that can do it, why not encourage them to do that? They can make a living off their phone right now, make some money in their pocket. It's the new lemonade stand, right? Being on YouTube. All right, Gary and Frankel, we'll let you go. Great stuff as always on Higher Ed. Always appreciate talking to you. Let folks know where they can follow you and keep up with you. We're going to link to your piece in Houston Chronicle. Great get. Good job with that. Let folks know where they can keep up with you until we get you back on again, my friend.
I'm most active on X or Twitter or Zeet or whatever it's called now, at FrankelGarion.
His friends call him Gary. I don't, because Garion's so much more fun. Gary and Frankel way down there deep in the heart of Texas, my friend. Appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, we talked about the bad parts of education a lot today. Let's talk about a good part of education because, we harp on the bad stuff, but most teachers are really good teachers trying their hardest. Most students are just kind of stuck in a system. They're trying to do their best. We don't want to make it like it's all bad news because there's still good stuff going on out there. Let's go out to Santa Clarita, California, KABC news item here. The orders are rolling in at Santa Clarita's. Rita, Rada, tomato. Santa Clarita's. I don't roll my R's. I'm a West Virginian. Just bear with me here. Golden Valley High School's brand new coffee cart. They call it the Grizzlies Cafecito. I guess you say it. I'm not a coffee drinker, and these words are frustrating me. And to start, they're only serving staff members. The coffee shop serves iced and hot coffees, tea, energy drinks, and snacks. There's also a video, by the way. We'll link to it. The school's special education students run the operation, and they say they are already learning so much. And there's interviews here. I mentioned before, my mom was a special education teacher. She went on a federal scholarship back in the late 60s and the early 70s. They were really the pioneers of special education, that generation. So I grew up around a lot of special education kids, a lot of Downs kids, what we now understand as autism. They didn't really know what it was back then, and they learned as they went. I love anything with special education like this. This is great. Quote from the piece: "It's important to pay your bills so you can live on your own. You can learn how to pay stuff," said Wyatt Furiyama. "Even if you have one road where they have to switch it up and you have to be really flexible in the coffee cart thing, you have to be flexible because there's a lot of people," said Madison Weingar. Sarah Cottiff, a career transition advisor, came up with the idea, and she says this opportunity will provide the students with vocational training as well as independent skills. The goal here is to help the students not only get a job and keep a job, but also to build their confidence and independence along the way. Quote, "Having the ability to make sure you make your own money, to be able to know that you are capable of doing that, it makes you feel good about yourself, and that's what we want for our students." Adult transition leader Alyssa Webb, I can't do names today, folks, bear with me, says this program is also a wonderful opportunity for the community to see how hard the students work so they can be welcomed them into the workforce. You hire someone with special needs who has the training, has the ability, they're going to be an asset to any company, and I really think that it is, to me, one of the biggest parts of the end game. Currently, the students operate the coffee cart once a week, but the teachers say they look to expand it even further in the future. I like this for a couple of reasons. One is, and again, the research my mom, when she first started in special education, the whole thing was they didn't even want them in the schools. There's actually, in the state of West Virginia, they actually had to have lawsuits just to get classroom space for special education students because they just wanted them to not be around, out of sight, out of mind. We don't have to worry about them. The great thing in the progress made here is you're not only bringing them to the fore, but you're integrating them in with everybody else and go, yes, they're capable of really great things if you just work them. Not just them, but letting everybody else be used to them as well. It's like, yeah, they're different. Yeah, they have differences. Yes, they'll have some tweaking you're going to have to do around the edges to make it all work. But if you're used to doing those kinds of modifications to let folks be a part of the community and let the community see that and be used for it at an early age, like in a high school program. As they transition into adulthood, they'll apply those same principles. Here's you a stat, and I know my mom's real proud of this stat. For people with Down syndrome, back in the early 70s, late 60s, when my mom started and first started doing the research on this stuff, the average age expectancy, life expectancy, not just talking about education, talking about their lifespan for a Down syndrome child in America was somewhere in the mid-30s. Today, it's in their late 60s, and it's almost 1-for-1 with the general population. That is a huge advancement. And it's not just a medical advancement. It's integrating them into society, letting these very special people know that they have great, great value far beyond what people thought they were capable of. We've had some that have run for office now with Down syndrome. We've had a Down syndrome gentleman that testified before Congress. We covered that a couple of years ago. These people can do amazing things if they just get a little bit of support and a little bit of understanding. And I love programs like this because it's not just them in a classroom and giving them a diploma. It's making them a part of the community and letting the community see, especially a community of young people in a high school environment, that these folks have great potential. And it's better for all of us to help them reach it. More Heard Tell right after this. And that's going to do it for this edition of Heard Tell. Thank you so much for joining us. Couple pieces of housekeeping. If you love listening to us, but really want to see what me and our guests look like in beautiful 1080 HD, I might recommend on some of these you turn it down to 720, but your mileage may vary. We have a YouTube channel, Heard Tell Show on YouTube. We put the interview segments up. It's full video, full audio, all the bells and whistles, even got little screen graphics, all that kind of fun stuff. But if you want the video version, you can see those. Usually comes out a couple days after the podcast version. The podcast version is also on YouTube, by the way. I know there's certain podcasts I listen to on YouTube audio format. So if you haven't subscribed and set up your notifications for the YouTube channel, please do so. Heard Tell Show on the YouTube, or just type in my name, Andrew Donaldson. It will come right up. However you're listening to this program in the traditional podcasting format, great. iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, every major platform, even some overseas in India and Europe and other places. We're on all of them. Just punch in Heard Tell Show or my name, Andrew Donaldson. It will come right up. Please make sure you subscribe and or follow whatever that platform calls it. If the platform gives you the option to leave a comment and a rating, please do so. That's important for a couple of reasons. One is we do see those and we get to interact with you and follow your feedback, or if you got something you want covered on the show or somebody you think we should talk to, we'd love to hear from you. But two is that lets those platforms know that our program is worth supporting and up boosting and giving us the attention that we try to get it. We don't pay for advertising here. In fact, we're giving away advertising to some of our friends because we want to make sure we help them out. We're working on new commercials for them. You'll hear those very soon. But it's a way of sharing us and letting us know, and those platforms know that we're worth their time. Also, if you really want to help us out, since this only costs you a click, it'll only cost you 2 clicks to share us on your own social media, and we sure appreciate it. Heardtell.substack.com, one-stop shopping for not just Heard Tell episodes, but everything I do, my various writings, anytime I do a media appearance, a radio hit, a TV hit, YouTube show, somebody else's podcast, whatever, make sure we share it on them. Another opportunity for you to comment and interact with us, ask questions, share us, let us know what you're thinking and feeling. We sure appreciate it. You want to give us an old school email, heardtellshow@gmail.com, heardtellshow at the Twitter, either one of those. We'd love for you to follow us along there. So that'll do it for Heard Tell. Wherever you are and whoever you're with, we hope you're well. We hope you're well fed. And we'll talk to you again real soon for more Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.